Welcome. This is Stephen Lee, and this is life and the living of it. I want to talk about 138. This is a little ratio that I learned in college in psychology class about emotional needs. One, this is the relationship that we have the deepest intimacy physically or emotionally. This normally applies to a partner, a spouse. With the one, you have the greatest and deepest intimacy on a couple of different levels. The three in 138 are the secondary connections that you have. These can be best friends, siblings, confidants. Now, these are not the ones that you turn to if the one isn't available necessarily. These are the good, dear, and trusted friends that you turn to while you're in the one primary relationship. And then the 8 of the 138 are the tertiary relationships in your life. These are the acquaintances or the beer buddies or the coffee crowd. This is the cheers crowd where everyone knows your name and they're always glad you came. Now, why am I talking about the 138 ratios for emotional health? Because the mistake I've personally made several times in my life is when I go from, for example, being in college to being graduated, the 138 ratio was thrown askew. The 8 tertiary friendships and relationships and connections were gone. 2 out of the 3 secondary relationships were gone or inaccessible, unavailable. The primary relationship, my girlfriend, terminated shortly thereafter. So I was left with one secondary friend, and that's about it. So if it takes 12 people in different functions to fulfill my emotional needs, now I had one, and that person was just a friend. They were not going to become number one. They were not at all going to become the one. And so I was suffering from emotional intimacy withdrawal. Now, for men, I think this is particularly hard because we're not really taught, one, to get all of our intimacy needs, and by the way, there's 12 of them, met in a social communal way. It's easy for men or for me to have 12, 15 acquaintances. I can do that. But 3 trusted friends, especially once I'm outside of a place like college, that's significantly more difficult. In fact, after college for about 10 years, I didn't really even have one good, close friend. And so, of course, when I met the next woman that I was interested in, I went totally overboard in my intensity. I asked way too many questions, focused on her way too much, wrote way too intense emails. Why? Because suddenly here was someone that could provide for my emotional needs, right? Wrong. I was so eager to forge those intimate bonds with this other person. And they didn't have to be romantic bonds, and they didn't have to be sexual bonds, but I wanted to forge these significant connections with this other person. And let me tell you, the correct response to that is for them to totally freak out, distance themselves, lose my phone number, etc., etc. A couple of other things that the 138 rule helps us to do. Having the 138 in our lives acts as a check on balances. Since a lot of our emotional intimate needs are being met on several levels, and intimacy here is where we have authentic two-way communication, similarities, and comfort with another person. When I say intimacy, a lot of people automatically think, oh, bedroom. But it does take about 12 different people to help meet emotional needs for connection. For example, when I had the 3 and the 8, then searching for the 1 wasn't seen as some kind of overwhelming need to find the 1. When I was in camping, for example, there were 200 plus people at that camp every single week. This was 15 to 20 pastors and sponsors, 40 to 50 staff, and the rest campers. I was inundated on all sides by all kinds of connections and they all fed my soul, my heart. And when that was happening, I felt no need whatsoever to search after, quote, the one. But when a potential the one came up, I didn't feel the need to impress or to go out of my way to secure this connection in any way. In other words, I wasn't driven by a need to connect as much as a desire to connect. Another way that the checks and balances work in the 138 is that hopefully your three very good, trusted friends, will be able to tell you if you're starting to push people away, if you're starting to focus too much, like 95% of who you are, on that one person, if you start failing to set boundaries, and so forth. These are the friends that say, hey, wait a minute, look, pause, examine, think. Because usually what drives that intensity that pushes other people away is because of some kind of fear that you're going to lose that primary relationship. If you have the 3 secondary and the 8 tertiary, that overwhelming need to protect and preserve at all costs that primary relationship won't be as strong. You won't feel like you're pushed into a corner to do things to preserve the relationship that normally you wouldn't do. Plus, having the 138 allows you to see if your partner, your spouse, your primary, the one, is setting expectations of you that would push other people away in your life. It's easier to be a little bit more emotionally objective when some of your other needs are being met by other people. It's actually easier to maintain the boundaries that you set with another person if some of your emotional needs are being met by other people, because then it's not an all or nothing thing. Now, I've had a lot of friends who have been in abusive and narcissistic relationships. One common thread through all of them is as the relationship progressed, the secondary and tertiary relationships vanished. Whether by actions on their part or by actions on their partner's part, the social safety net, the emotional safety net, disappeared. And suddenly the only person who's giving you any kind of emotional support, any kind of meaningful connection, is the person in front of you who may be abusing that same connection. In fact, one of the first questions I ask people is, who are your friends? How often are you in contact with them? Do you have a go-to friend that you go to for the most immediate problems or the worst problems you're having in your life? And how's your partner or spouse or the person that you're in a relationship with, do they complain about that one relationship you have? Do they prevent you from having contact with that person? And most likely the answer is that they do not like competition on any level, which means they would rather you not have external relationships to your relationship. And that's when you have to start really looking at the relationship. If your partner is determining who you can be friends with or whether you can have friends at all, it's time to get out. Another way that the 138 helps with checks and balances is you can actually do reality checks with your secondary friends and even your tertiary friends. You can ask things like, does it make sense that I feel this way? Well, I'm thinking that, is that thought rational? So we can seek validation, we can seek confirmation. We can ask our friends whether the boundaries and the limits we set are working or not working, whether the emotional decisions that we make are valid or invalid. The secondaries and the tertiaries are there for a reality check. Another benefit of the 138 is that if you are in a primary relationship and a lot of change happens in a very short amount of time, like for example a death happens, an injury happens, a job is lost, it usually takes more than one person to help emotionally process those levels of changes. Because if you're in the one, your partner may be going through their own changes, or they may be going through your changes with you, but they don't have the emotional bandwidth nor the objectivity that your secondary friends would have in order to help you process the change. One of my professors in seminary had a great phrase for this. She said it takes one person to break a heart and it takes a community to heal it. So what if you don't have a 138? For example, for a time, I had a 0 out of 12. I had a 0, 0, 0. How do we begin to get those ratios where they need to be? One, it's easier to get the 8 tertiary, the acquaintance, the coffee crowd, the church crowd. Maybe it's the PTA crowd, or maybe it's the quilting guild crowd. It's important to get those people in place, at least have a connection with them. Now, do you need exactly 8? No, there's some flexibility. But if you feel like you belong in a group, it's a great start. Then from that group, you can try to find really good, trusted friends. Again, like finding the one, you won't feel an overwhelming need to establish a best friend right away, because at least some of your emotional needs will be met by the coffee crowd, by the beer crowd, by the golf crowd. And then when you have 2 or 3 really good, trusted friends, you can spend your time looking for the right one, the complementary one, the best one, because you'll have your 3 good, trusted friends and your 8 that form your community, and you won't feel so pressured to find nor need the one. This is the emotional needs rule of the 1, 3, 8. And this is life and the living of it.